Since we're about a month into the RPG Bookclub Jam, and we've got a decent amount of participants and entries at this point, I figured I'd go over some of them and maybe a little bit about what makes this bundle different from a lot of other ones that I've seen. I can't really say it's different from every bundle, but first of all, we're pretty sure at this point that the proceeds are going to go to charity, specifically a charity called Dot's RPG Project that tries to promote accessibility in role-playing games. Now, a charity jam itself, that's not really that unusual, but there are a couple ways I feel like ours differs from a lot of the other ones you might see. First off, and something that's probably not going to be, exactly a selling point for a lot of people, most of our entries are free or pay what you want to begin with. We've got a couple paid ones in here, $20, $3, $1 here and there. It adds up to about $24, I suppose. But, like I said, that's not necessarily a selling point. It was mainly something that came about just because, our book club is mainly for free RPGs, so a lot of the entries are free, and I think honestly that is not a problem for me. I very much like free RPGs, but for some people it might, affect the amount they want to donate, but it is what it is. What I think is good about that, though, is that it's really made sure that, pretty much no one who's submitted is particularly focused on profit. Not that, many RPG creators are. It isn't exactly a profitable industry for most independent creators, but, that's another thing it sort of ensures, that most of our projects are, independent passion projects, and that's something that I'm really happy to be able to promote and to try to bring more attention to, because it can be very hard to, sort of break into the audience of people that actually play RPGs and not just make them, in terms of someone who also makes RPGs. So, those are some of the main differences. It's for charity, it's a pay-what-you-want bundle composed of mostly pay-what-you-want games, which, like I said, might be a downside for some people, but I think really helps promote the passion and the independence and the originality and creativity and so many other factors of what really gets me excited for little-known RPG projects. And another one is the number of submissions. Well, I definitely expect to have a bit more by the end of the submission window. I don't really want to have more than 50 at most. A lot of charity bundles will have something like, 100 entries, 500 entries, just so many entries that you can almost guarantee that people that obtain it aren't playing most of the games there. And what I'm really trying to focus on is making something that, as well as being cool for charity, is sort of a valuable, well, not really valuable, but a quality product in and of itself, in a way, in that this bundle is a recommendation of a lot of the most innovative and well-polished, maybe not in terms of art and in terms of amount of content all the time, but just in terms of being functional games. It's very much a recommendation from me about all of these. I think this is a bundle that you can take anything from it that looks interesting to you and really end up enjoying it. And that's something that's sort of special. And I'm not really trying to, say that's necessarily not true about other bundles, but so many of the charity bundles are just trying to focus on getting as many people involved as possible as a way to encourage donations, which is definitely cool. But I am curious to see if doing something a little different, doing something more focused on sort of a common theme of independent projects that have all been, to an extent at least, vetted for quality, can make the bundle more successful in terms of something people actually play the games of, and maybe even over a long term, over sort of a long term view of things, actually secure more donations by creating a reputation for future projects or future bundles of, just being stuff that are really worth looking into and encouraging future donations on the next bundle. You know, looking through researching for this, I've seen things where people view charity bundles as just a way to, an excuse to donate, and I say that almost as if it's a bad thing, which is clearly not, but they don't necessarily obtain the bundle with a view of really checking out the games in it. They just do it as, again, to donate, which is cool, but I'm looking to sort of do both, to help secure donations and to also promote a lot of the games in the bundle in a meaningful way, and hopefully create sort of a brand off of that that can be used to reach a wider audience and get even more donations in the future if you're worried about, this way of doing things not quite being as beneficial for charity in a short-term sense. Plus, it would probably be harder for me with my limited reach to get a ton of submissions as well. So may as well make sure the ones we do get count. Alright, starting to look at the actual games. Sorry if that was a little long-winded. Alright, we'll start with Against the Odds. Now, my memory on some of these is not, what do you call it? Exactly fresh, per se, and some of them have had significant updates since I last looked. But, this also hopefully will function as a sort of dry run for when I hopefully do a really in-depth look at all the submissions when the bundle is actually published. But we'll just check out the project page. Against the Odds by Helena Real, or Real, however that's pronounced. This is not another fantasy game about killing monsters. This is a game about heroes and villains. It's true, but these heroes don't kill, or at least don't if they want to remain heroes. Come and try to make a fantasy world a better place. Against the Odds, everything you need. 4 stats, no hit points, 12 playbooks, which is effectively classes, I'm sure, though I can't quite remember. Different ways to do magic, which is, what I would expect for having different classes. And then every hero character has a resource, a corruption trigger, and a corruption move, or corruption moves. This is sort of the main, I would say, unique mechanic and focus in the symptom of the system, so I'll try to give a brief overview of that in a minute. Heroic Sacrifice, which is also sort of unique, but definitely something I've seen in other games. Okay, all the core and extra moves necessary to play, guidance on easily setting up an adventure, and rules on NPCs and stuff, and so much more. And there's a survey. The artist. But sort of the main thing I would say that's unique about this, it's a PBTA game, if you didn't notice, is the corruption moves. I'll see if they have something that, I can sort of look at for that in terms of screenshots. Now that's more character information, stuff. Let's see, which moves? Yeah, I'm not seeing a sort of showcase of corruption moves on the screenshots, unfortunately. But basically, once your character, I think, I can't quite remember, but I'll try to play it out. Once your character gets corrupted or does something that, they shouldn't as a hero, such as killing someone or acting against their calling. I think different callings have specific things that corrupt them. They get access to corruption moves, and these moves let them do additional things, but also add to their corruption as well. And as that goes up, I think you get certain features as a result of it, until eventually, if you keep increasing corruption, your character becomes a villain and you no longer control them effectively, if I remember right. So that was a fairly interesting system. I'm not sure I'm doing it justice as is, but that's sort of like the main selling point of the system, I would say. And all the classes are relatively unique in how they have their own corruptions and how those feature. And their normal moves are also fairly interesting, so it's not just a corruption thing, but that's sort of a basic explanation of Against the Odds. Alright, looking at Oceania now. Go to the project page. An asymmetric tabletop role-playing game for 3 to 8 players, where one player acts as big brothers and the others play members of a resistance. Yeah, I don't quite remember much roguelike inspiration, but I looked at it a long time ago, so there might have been an update since then. Yeah, it's got a very interesting way that sessions play out narratively, like different players have different scenes, and some of the Big Brother actions take place in between them. Like there's a morning announcement that the Big Brother narrates as the players start their day and stuff. A lot of interesting stuff with storytelling and like that. It definitely, to me, seemed more focused on, collaborative storytelling, really, more than being mechanics heavy. Like, there are definitely mechanics, but the focus is not on playing well as much as it is creating a story, and it is somewhat adversarial because, the GM is at times acting against the players. This all seems fairly accurate. Yeah, I've never actually played it, so I can't speak to how it plays that much, but the rulebook is very interesting. It's not a game I can as easily sum up. Like, there's the obvious stuff that it's, sort of an Orwellian setting, that it is about resisting that setting, and that it plays out through one of the players actually acting as the oppressive system and having abilities based around that, and there are setups of different scenes where players can take turns figuring out what they do, and it's all very story-focused in that way, but it's hard to sum up in a couple sentences. It's a very interesting game, and if any of that sounds interesting, you should definitely check it out. Taking a look at Chains of Gaia. I looked at this one a little more recently, so I can hopefully explain it a bit better. It's a Dark Souls-inspired game, or maybe just FromSoft in general. And it has a lot of lore, which seems pretty well thought out, and different classes, though I don't quite remember what it calls them, where the magical classes have a list of spells, and the more physical-oriented classes have abilities, but a lot of the abilities that, you'll most often use in combat, rather than more passive stuff, actually comes from whatever weapon that class chooses. So you get sort of the interplay of both the abilities of your class and the abilities of the weapon you pick, and you get to choose different abilities from those that you get based on progression and stuff. You don't get access to everything at once, so there's a lot of customization in that sense. You can really tell the Dark Souls inspiration there, where a lot of what you do comes from the weapon you pick, and the storyline has that has the feel you would expect it to very well, and is well thought out. Not the storyline, the setting. There was also, I think, a corruption mechanic in this as well, but not exactly, not like Against the Odds, where it's something that sort of slowly happens over time and affects your moves as much as sort of something that just builds up and then causes your character to transform once it builds up enough. Like, less of an ethical example of corruption and more like magical corruption, but it was an interesting mechanic too, and it had cards that were related that was pretty fun. Yeah, Major Arcana Tarot cards are how the interplay with the corruption system. And there's some ethical element there, but it's more focused on how the setting corrupts you than whether your character is doing ethical things or not, per se. And it runs both ways, by being too... I'll use light and dark, though I can't remember if that's the terminology used. Light corruption can occur as well as dark corruption, though the word might be different, and the transformation is different depending. So that was a very fun and interesting system as well. Okay, Plague of Beasts. Yeah, there's a lot of people transforming, and there are sort of different gods that are causing that. Yeah, so, again, if any of the description of these games sounded interesting to you, I can vouch for them that they're definitely worth a read. I feel like I didn't do a great job explaining Oceania, but like I said, this is sort of just a test run of explaining these games, and hopefully I'll be able to, there's an actual play, hopefully I'll be able to do it a bit more justice when things are more final. But did I mention the awards? Oceania has won multiple awards. This one is a little hard to share up because it's from a Brazilian organization, which means it's kind of hard to find information for it online, searching things up in English, but it's definitely real. If you try to search up that award and don't find it at first, or only find posts from the creator of Oceania mentioning it, that's not because it's fluff or anything. It's just not in English organization that awarded it, and that makes finding information a lot harder. Okay, I wanted to make sure I mentioned the author, because I forgot to do that too. Yeah, it's by Joker Games. We'll see if there's a different name that has gone by here. I think it's a he. He goes by other names online too than just Joker Games, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And that's all that seems to be used on here, so that's fine. Yeah, and then Chains of Gaia was by, I think this one has a team behind it as well. Not necessarily just one person heading it up. But let's see if we can find anything on the author. Should I be looking at comments too? I think we'll, figure that out by the time of the next one. But does it say who it's by here? No, it just said introduction there. So I can't find really any credit, so to speak, here. I probably could if I went all the way to the back of the book, but maybe not. So for now, I will not mention an author. Alright, Spellify. Yeah, Chains of Gaia is just by Chains of Gaia, as far as we know so far. Like I said, I think there's a team behind this one, so there's not necessarily just one author named at the front of the book. Now, Spellify, this is a 24-word RPG that has you use it. You basically, anytime you encounter a problem, you try to cast a spell, and then there are two tables, I think, where there are two sort of evocative words that combine to make a spell, and you have to figure out what you think that's going to do, or have a GM do it if you're playing with different people. It's not super in-depth because it's 24 words. It looks like this one takes you right to the game, but it's cute visually, and I like the tables. Yeah, okay, it's not quite the game, but it's close. I strongly recommend an X card. But if you like what you see here, that pretty much matches the vibe of the game, and since it's only 24 words, it's a very quick read. Like I said, I think the art is very nice, and I think the tables are good, and it's mostly just a couple tables since it's a 24-word game, so, even if you're not that interested in the concept, it would be pretty quick to check it out, and it's definitely worth checking out if you are. So, anytime there's a problem, you cast a semi-randomized spell, basically is the gist of it. This one, Paraploidia by Jules Ampere. This is a very unique one, even in the context of our jam, which has a lot of unique games. It's sort of like a pamphlet for an organization that tells you how to deal with a supernatural curse where there are these mimics that look sort of like people and everyday objects, and whenever you come across something that looks like a face, you have to perform a certain action of your choice to try and eliminate that curse. So it's sort of like something you do as you go about your day, and it seems like it's sort of intended to sort of simulate delusions as well. And so it's sort of a game that, despite being something that, is analog and you just read and act out, does kind of mess with your mind a little, so it's very interesting. Yeah, you can see it's already sort of in character in the writing. I think the hunting methods are the different actions you can perform to sort of exercise the entity or curse. And there are different kind of entities. Basically, anytime you're going about your day and you see something that looks like a face, there's something you have to do in response, and that's how you quote-unquote play. So it's a very interesting experience. Like many of these, I haven't personally tried it myself, but it seems pretty cool. And it all works functionally as far as I can tell. I went over the rules like with all of these, and they seem to work perfectly fine. Then we've got Peak Calm, though I will say, like all of these, or not necessarily all of these, the 24-word ones, for example, don't tend to, but there are a decent number of these that have some minor flaw in the rules somewhere, the last time I checked. That tends to happen with, honestly, any game book, even ones that do have much bigger teams and production value behind them. But all of these I've checked, and there is nothing major that really breaks the game or anything like that. And that does happen surprisingly often, I've found, looking at people's projects, but all of these are, at the very least, functional, and also very cool, I think, personally. This is Peak Calm by Kai Kassan. It is it's a solo game, and what's interesting is there isn't a set objective. It is cozy. I don't personally know how you define cozy per se, but it's a very free-form game without major threats, and you decide your own objectives, but the game provides plenty of chances for you to make those objectives. Yeah, instead of being so vague, I'll just tell you what the game's about. You become a sort of forester who is responsible for a rundown park, and you have, what you do in the game essentially is explore it and then encounter random things like tourists or different kinds of flora and fauna or stuff like that, and you can mark it down on charts and on your map and decide whether or not you're trying to improve things or just explore and go where you will. And there's different little dice rolling things you do for all the different encounters, and you can map stuff out. I don't know. Again, I don't really know how well I'm explaining things. I usually, when I go over games, have the game up and stuff, so I can just point out stuff, but it's a fun game that's fairly rules light that you can just play by yourself and have fun mapping out a park and deciding your own objective and when to stop and stuff like that. There's a 6-day cycle where you might encounter, or 7-day, one of those, where you might encounter different kind of animals and nature on different days and stuff like that. And there's a chance for encounters to repeat or get dissolved in different squares. So it's just a simple, fun exploration game without a ton of threats, where you can set your own objectives and sort of go through nature and stuff. So that's pretty cool. Clutch Decisions. This one is another one of the sort of odd ones, also by Kaikasan. And it is a mechanic, I guess you'd call it. I don't know what precisely you would call it, but method, I guess, for generating roads, often in real time during a chase or something, where you can roll and stuff as the GM to figure out where a road turns and how sharply it turns, and if one road turns more dramatically than the other, it might result in the players having to make a roll to see if they can keep control of the car, and there are certain car or carriage or horses or whatever it is, and there are certain hazards that can come up. So it's a very niche thing in a sense, but also something that could come up in basically any longer campaign in any setting. Just basic vehicle controls on a path that hasn't been meticulously mapped out beforehand, and even if one has, some of the turning mechanics might still be useful. So it's a very fun method for generating roads that is not super intensive and fills them with action, as long as the players are moving along at any sort of decent speed. So that's pretty cool. The language is based on a specific kind of driving, I think, but it works for stuff beyond that. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's... I've stopped reading out the descriptions, because I figure you can do that while I'm talking. I'm just going to go over it quickly to see if there's anything I missed. Yeah, based on rally pace notes. Quick and easy to use, yep. Yeah, any of these descriptions would be helpful for you to read, but I covered sort of the basics there. Here's another interesting one, also by Jules Ampere, the person who made Paraploidia, but this one's a little simpler. Not necessarily simpler in terms of content that is written out, but in terms of what you do. You don't necessarily do physical actions. It's more of a day planner that is, for some reason, it's not loading properly, but it's sort of a day planner that's based around acting like your life is a video game and writing out quests and bosses for the more challenging stuff. Hopefully, this will actually load for me. Okay, there we go. A small, fun way to organize your week. It's one of those that I have not looked at in a long time, so I don't quite know how to phrase the details, but, it lets you make side quests and a boss for the main thing you have to do in your day and just sort of quickly and easily plan out what you're going to do in a fantasy context, and it seems pretty fun. Okay, yeah, go on a magical quest such as a side mission, find collectibles and packages and stuff. Yeah, and it's pretty light. It's not a heavy read. it's a fun, interesting way to do things that has some nice art to it. Like, just to go over sort of the split of how we've got things so far, these are all relatively big. Like, I think these are definitely 50 pages and up. This one might be a little under 50 pages. These probably go closer to 100, or even more, but I can't quite remember off the top of my head. So we've got like 3 longer games here, then 24 words, let's say 4 or 5 pages in that range. Maybe 20 pages or 12, something along those lines. Going off of memory, it's hard, but we've got some longer projects from really short ones, and some, still light, but a little more bulky than 24 words ones so far. This, I think, is relatively sizable, despite being just about generating roads, because it kind of covers a lot of things, so that's nice. Here's another one that I think is at least 50 pages, or maybe a little under that, not quite 100, I'm pretty sure. But it is a sort of fun, tongue-in-cheek, but also semi-serious post-apocalyptic game where a group of players are trying to find a legendary safe place in the radiated wasteland and leave a shelter to do it. Actually, now that I remember this, I don't think it's long at all. I don't think it's just 2 pages, but it might actually only be, it's definitely more than 2 pages, because there are a bunch of different tables, but this is less long than I mentioned before, now that I think about it. It's about as long as it needs to be for sort of a light exploration adventure across the wasteland with multiple possible endings for what the oracle or prophesized location actually is. Like, I won't spoil the endings, but they're all pretty interesting. The mutations table is pretty fun. Let's see if we can find a neat one there, like crab claws. You got a second head. And it's not all crazy stuff. There's some simple stuff too, but the mutations are very fun. Let's see what I'm missing. Dangerous radioactive soil. There are also some, I don't think there are any specifically described NPCs you can counter, but it talks about encountering settlements as well and stuff. So you were actively kicked out of the bunker. I couldn't quite remember the details there. Or maybe that's just this specific character. The Oracle of Kai Yigo, which there are a bunch of different options for what that can actually be that the players will find. No one really knows what it is, but it might be safe. It has 1-page rules, but it has a bunch of different helpful tables, if I recall. Well, not if I recall, I just read that. I didn't recall it, actually, but... weird, dark, and humorous tone, improvised one same session, as well as for longer adventures. Probably not massively longer, but, not without adding a few things, but you can obviously easily do that. The game system is designed to reflect adaptation. So that kind of covers it. It's not quite Fallout in tone. It's a little more, what would I say? It's a little more whimsical or maybe weird than that, but it's very, not that Fallout isn't that sometimes, but a lot of the time, Fallout, I feel like, has a consistent tone aside from those moments, and this one is more out there at points. It's a very interesting read-through, and it's fairly simple rules with a bunch of cool tables that have different endings and mutations and things like that to help you really plan a session or a campaign around and to randomize things. Right, on to this. This one I haven't actually gotten a huge chance to look at, but the art is very nice because it's just a setting. It hasn't been submitted to the book club before this, and it's a setting, so I wasn't worried too much about vetting the mechanics, but, I looked through it. All the lore seems fairly interesting. The art is pretty great. It's maybe one of the most polished in terms of PDFs that we have. You know, it looks very nice, and I think the lore is interesting from what I saw of it. So this is definitely worth checking out if you're interested in that sort of setting. Let me actually look at the project page. A fantasy setting and toolbox. I know it has a lot of tables. A collection of procedures, tables, and world-building instruments. Yeah, drifting isles, perilous skies, and fractured powers. Ideas and cultures class, and it's an ever-changing and unforgiving landscape. Yeah, and there's a bunch of different lore, there's a bunch of different tools, there's some good art in it. So this is definitely, again, any of that interests you, it's worth checking out. I haven't had time to look into it that much, but what I did, I liked. There's that, Samsara. This is another 24-word RPG. You know, not to put you off any of the other ones like Spellify, but it's probably my favorite 24-word RPG that I've seen. Maybe just because I'm sort of I always like looking at comparative religions and stuff like that, and this is entirely based off of Buddhism. The main thing I like about it is I think the main mechanic, you know, most 24 words are going to have like one mechanic, and the mechanic of this is pretty elegant. You just roll to see what your karma was, positive or negative. Well, first, and then based off that, figure out what creature you are. Describe your suffering over that lifetime. Roll again to see if you reincarnate as a lesser or higher being. Describe your suffering, and then just do it over and over, which is pretty neat, and I think really illustrates the concept of samsara, or the cyclic nature of reincarnation and suffering under Hinduism/Buddhism. It's very interesting, and I think it, like I said, I think it has sort of the best base mechanic that I've seen in terms of just being, I don't know what the word is, but I guess well designed for a 24-word RPG. It's also hyper-specific, and, you know, it's not quite as visually interesting as Spellify, I think. So it might not be one you like better, but for me, I think it's a very well-designed game, and that's kind of why I'm excited about it. But again, Spellify is also great, and you might like it better. It's all down to a matter of opinion. Ice Snow and the Quest for Salvation. This is a solo journaling game where you follow a ship's crew on an Arctic expedition where the ship became trapped in ice, and they have to leave it and try and find, you know, safety of some form. And you've got limited resources, there are disease, there is limited food supplies, there is a morale for your crew. You can create 5 specific NPCs that have a bit more of a backstory to make journaling easier, and then you just have a bunch of crew members depending on how bad the accident that got you there was. And it's mainly about rolling to see what encounters you get. There are a bunch of interesting things that can happen, like disease or strange, potentially supernatural creatures showing up, or encountering various groups of people that live in the Arctic already. And then you roll for that and see what happens and journal based off of it. And it's all a setup for a very interesting journey for you to just discover by yourself. Let me go to the actual page again. This one is by Rat in a Suit, who has submitted a ton of games to our book club, so it's nice to see their work again. Stranded in a frozen wasteland, the expedition ship sits trapped in the ice. Around it, and the crew is slowly unloading what supplies they can carry. They have been forced to abandon ship, now must attempt an arduous trek towards salvation. Yeah, there's not a huge description there, but it doesn't necessarily need one. I really like the visuals of the page, but definitely check this out if you're looking for a fun solo adventure, or you like that kind of setting. There we go. Critical Triggers. This is an interesting one, because it's one of the 2 games we have, one of which is mine, that is based around a dice rolling mechanic that's not just about the number that comes up, but how you roll the dice physically and where they land and stuff. Which, sometimes people call that dexterity-based games. I don't know that I love the term, but if that's a term you're familiar with, that's what it's referring to. Like, you try to roll dice into a set area, and the number rolled matters, but also every time you fail, maybe not every time you fail, I can't quite remember the trigger for it, but every time something happens, you take one of your dice and you put it in a tower that slowly builds up, and if the tower falls, that causes a lot of problems for you. I don't think I'm doing a great job of explaining, but it's a fun setting with a very specific vibe. I feel like, it's cyberpunky, it's about being a group of people on a mission. Yeah, one-page rules. I think there's a back and a front. There's not a ton of art, but the mechanics are mainly what you're looking for this one, and they are interesting. Character creation is quick and easy. It's, fast and frenetic gameplay-wise, it seems. I think the sort of number of dice you have is kind of representative of a guns magazine, and there's reloading mechanics or something along those lines and stuff like that. It's another one I'm having trouble explaining, but trust me, it is a very interesting set of mechanics and, good cyberpunk theming. Ultraviolet corporate dystopia with a dark side of dark humor. So that sort of covers it. I might rely on the summary a bit here because I'm having a bit of trouble talking. Neon-drenched underbelly of tomorrow. The writing of the game itself is not quite as descriptive, I suppose you might say, because it's, pretty mechanic focused, but a lot of the tone still carries through. Yeah, high stakes hits, rapid fire operations where precision meets chaos, whether you're extracting a corporate defector. Yeah, hyper stylized action movie with sharp cuts. I believe that is supported mechanically as well, I can't quite remember. Dynamic combat and razor sharp one-liners. There is, in fact, I think, a mechanic that relates to one-liners for a certain skill set or something along those lines. So that's not just metaphorical. There is, in fact, a one-liner mechanic. Yeah, and you flick dice onto a zone, and then you run out of dice that are in your mag. You can reload that, but there's usually a consequence. Yeah, and then if you miss, the tower starts to rise. There are other things that raise the tower. And if the tower falls, that has consequences, pretty big ones if I remember. So it's a very interesting, unique mechanic that mimics a gun magazine, and a lot of the tone is action, movie, cyberpunky, and sort of humorous, like it said. So if any of that interests you, definitely check it out. This is also Pushinero, who did Spellify. Pillars What Remains. So this one is, maybe a bit earlier on than some of the other projects in terms of development. Like, I think it doesn't have as much art as many of the other ones, but it's very interesting in that the party controls a single character that they sort of take turns playing out scenes in the history of, and they each they take turns playing out scenes in the history of, and it all takes place as a courier is traveling across a magical wasteland, so those memories have the potential to get corrupted and act by the environment as it sort of warps reality in your memories, and by the end of the game, you potentially face a alternate version of yourself that the wasteland created in a sort of dream-esque, surreal sequence and stuff. It's very cool, all of it, I think. Each one embodies a mental aspect of the player character, and that's defined by memories. And then echoes. Yeah, I forgot, along with all the memory-altering stuff, there's actual physical encounters with dangers of the wasteland, and you can, use certain mechanics to increase your chances, but some of that stuff leads to the sort of warped memories that can happen. It's all very interesting and well thought out, I think. It's intended to be one-shots, definitely. Yeah, there's also some setting information, too. I forgot about that. But I think that sort of covers most of it. It's a very unique game premise and very psychological and surreal. Moving on, Escape from the Horde. This is a, what do you call it? A module or adventure, depending on what term you use for an existing system, but you don't need to know the system in order to start playing. The bits of it that you need to engage with are explained as they come up in the module in a way that I think works pretty well. And it has I don't know if they show a picture of it, but it has a really incredible map of all the different things you encounter in the dungeon as your characters are captured. If I remember right, it's another system that's kind of focused on the potential for players to corrupt and transform, or NPCs too. It's a short one-shot module with rules included, like I said. Yeah, they are captured in a warren, stripped of weapons, and about to be eaten by goblins who have overrun the area. I can't remember if this is correct, but I think, spoilers maybe, but the goblins are actually sort of transformed people due to eating a certain kind of food that they also try to feed to you, but I might be completely wrong about that detail. It's been a bit. Yeah, there's a layout, there's gnomish contraptions, there's magic items that you can come across. An old-fashioned dungeon crawl in a sense, but very workable even for modern players, and with a lot of interesting setting stuff and baked-in mechanics and weird transformations, a bit at least. That's not necessarily the main focus. So, and I really enjoy the map on this one. There is in fact a dragon that is too large to fit through the door to the treasure room, and you can bring it treasures or potentially negotiate with it. Yeah, unpredictable magic scrolls and various cells with other prisoners. And yeah, if one of your characters died when you get to a prisoner, they can just make a new character and you encounter that character in the cell. So a baked-in way for players to jump back into the action if their character dies, which is always very nice. You can see some of the map in the background here, all the different levels and rooms, and the rooms already are explained by number with the stuff you can encounter in them. It's a very well-developed one-shot. Well, it would probably take 2 sessions maybe, but this is a quick one. It is a single bookmark. Yeah. And one of the things that can operate based on D12s, and the things that I really like about this, other than it just, it seems like it will work decently well, is I really like this sort of image that you can roll D12s to coincide to things like direction and weather and time of day all in one. And I think that's a really cool idea, and I like how it's represented visually there. The other thing is that there are sort of campaign ideas on the other side of the bookmark, and one of them is that you can sort of use this system to jump in and try to see if you can resolve a situation in a book differently, just playing it out using these mechanics, which I think is a very fun way to look at things. So it's a pretty simple system, but the two things I really like about it are the D12 compass and weather system, and the idea of just, you know, taking wherever you are with the bookmark in the book and trying to play it out using rolling mechanics and seeing how things would go. And I think that's fun. I didn't really read the page description or the author. The poor D12 is almost never used, so I made this game to celebrate it. A very simple RPG, like I said. Resolutions using D12, weather, time, and direction using the D12, and 4 campaign ideas. And the main campaign idea I like is how it should have ended. If the story you are reading has an event that needs resolution, feel free to use this bookmark to determine how it should have ended. This allows you to spin a new story/event out of the threads of the ones you are reading. How would you solve the problem? And I think that's a very fun concept. And that's not me saying the other stuff about a D12 and how the environment can affect the results is bad. It's just those are not like the main things that jumped out to me. Like doing a no and no but yes but. I don't always love those terms, but for a game that's based around potentially figuring out the way a story pre-written in a book goes, it's a very good way to work with things. Having no ands and buts and yes buts and ands to sort of be agnostic and really fitting into a narrative flow. And did I say that was by STS Gamer? I think, yes. That was by STS Gamer. Pillows What Remains was by Night Danger Games. Escape from the Horde was by, I guess, Andanome and Anthorx, or however you say that. Here is H is for Helmo, which is, a sort of parody game of a certain series that is designed for, episodic one-shots where you encounter different puppets or different creatures from this alternate world that have taken over a town. And you try and solve their problems or thwart them, and then there's an ongoing storyline that plays across these episodes where you're trying to find and free the captured villagers. And you're doing all of this at the behest of, a certain person of the last name of Rogers from a neighboring town who's trying to get you to help out. There's a letter of the day table, which helps you arrange episodes around, which I think is fun theming. There's a under trash, which is, where the character that lives in a trash can hides and travels through, and you can travel through that. And there's also a Count's Castle and stuff like that. So it's more like an idea of how to generate an episode than it's sort of a module, but instead of giving specifics, it gives you some elements to generate a fun horror version of a TV show adventure. And there are a couple more fleshed out areas that can have, specific encounters like the Under Trash and the Count's Castle as well. But it's pretty freeform. And, I think you can tell just from the concept of the name whether this is something that's going to interest you or not. And like all of the games featured, it is fairly easy to use and has no major flaws that I could find anywhere. So, as usual, if you like the concept of H's for Homo, definitely check this out. That is by Giant Brain, and it's part of a series they do called Monster Fight 5e, which is, it says 5e, but is not D&D specific in any way, as far as I remember. Okay. Simple D100 Fantasy. Now this is sort of an agnostic D100 system, but one that's a little more simplified than some of the old classic D100 fantasy systems. And what I liked about this is I can't quite remember the details, but it has some very interesting dice mechanics that I haven't seen in other D100 based games. Nothing that changes the way you do everything. It's still like percentile based on stats or skills, but there are a couple little quirks to how the dice work that I think are fun changes. And there are different classes that you can play. There isn't really a specific setting. I think none of it's too repressive. It's, rules light for being a, full D100 percentage-based fantasy system. I desire to have a default rule system for my many groups that is intuitive and avoids the common issues. And adaptable. And I would say that is an accurate description. It's inspired by basic fantasy role-playing. I really can't compare it to basic fantasy role-playing that much because I haven't actually looked at them. But, if you're looking to try out a D100 percentage-based fantasy system and one that has some interesting and fun switch-ups for the dice, or just, maybe look into the dice mechanics and see if it could fit another D100 game that you're running, this is definitely worth a look. And it is by, did I say who it is by? Maybe not. I think by Vidar Gavia, or something. Now here, these two are by Warbriel. This is a samurai-based role-playing game with a setting and different factions, and all trying to figure out who becomes the shogun. It's relatively rules light, it's easy to pick up and play like a lot of the games here, but it's a full system with a set of mechanics. It's not like just meant for one specific kind of adventure like a lot of the rules light systems here are. It's for stuff involving samurai, but there are enough mechanics to really sustain a campaign, definitely. And I can't necessarily remember the details, but the thing I liked about it best was the progression system. Like, there are certain things that carry over when one character that dies to the next. There's a whole, I think you can start owning land and stuff that is done in a functional way, but, still relatively light, so it doesn't bog anything down. And your character can gain abilities or even downsides as they develop and stuff. So, like I said, I unfortunately can't remember the details, but like I said, there's social position, and you can improve honor and wealth as well as just mechanical stuff. Gains a benefit according to the table. So this doesn't cover everything, but there's a lot of different progression stuff that I find very interesting about this system, and it's just also a very workable samurai campaign system that is rules light, but gives you a lot to work with. Okay, and then there's Clash of the Gigamechas, which is sort of interesting because there are two phases. One where you're a member of an academy and there's not a lot of danger, but how you progress through the academy with other characters changes what you get when your characters actually join the Mecha War between the Dominion of Mankind and the Republic of Cresta. And then things do get more dangerous and involve mechs and stuff. So it's got two phases of gameplay, which is pretty fun. I'm losing energy a bit, so I don't know how much I can really go over things well moving forward, but we're almost done. Cadets have 3 attributes, and they also have influence. So it's like it can sort of support a teen drama in an academy and then move into an actual war with risks of death and stuff, and that's an interesting way to have characters develop. Yeah, there are different mechs you can get. The art is all nice. Yeah, and you can, as it mentions, skip the academy. I would say there's a bit more focus on the war stuff, but the academy is definitely still supported. I think it's sort of PBTA adjacent. I can't quite remember, but if any of that sounds interesting to you, a teen mech academy that then develops into an actual war, you should definitely check this out. Okay, and the Prosper system. This is a quick start, sort of quick start in quotes, because it's for a big system, so it's still a lot of pages, but it takes out a lot of the setting stuff and just takes you straight to mechanics. It's all laid out pretty well. It's got a lot of optional rules that are interesting. It's dystopian future, psychic abilities, stuff like that. Player-facing roles. And I'm trying to think, the main thing is, the dice system. And it's a pool system, sort of, if I remember right. You get a d20 that is focused on your stat, and then depending on how many skills or other bonuses you have that apply, you can roll d10s for each of those. And you're trying to roll under your stat or your skill. And the more successes you get, the better things go for you. So it's a relatively unique, maybe some other people do it, but I haven't seen it before, pool system in a post-apocalyptic setting with player-facing rules and a lot of modular rules that can be switched in and out. So if that interests you, definitely check this one out. There's maybe one concern I have that I'm trying to get in contact with the person that made it about, but nothing super major. It's there's 3 actions, and a movement action and action or even an attack action, I can't quite remember which, and then defensive actions, and those weren't really explained that well, at least in terms of the quick start. So hopefully I can get that cleared up, but otherwise it's a very functional, in-depth system that, like I said, is modular, roll under, pools, not post-apocalyptic, just dystopian cyber with psychic abilities and unarmed combat as well as weapons that you get abilities from. So a very interesting mechanic-heavy system if you want to check that out. And this I haven't had a chance to look at since it is a module for this. I figured as long as this was good enough, we would just say this is probably covered, but this is more content for this system and probably contains a lot more setting information instead of just the rules if you're looking for that as well. Okay, We Are the Land, that is by Rat in a Suit, who also made Ice Snow and the Quest for Salvation. This is a group game, I think generally. You could probably do it solo, but it's mostly for a group where the players are sort of supernatural or folklore-like creatures that are trying to protect an area from a bunch of NPCs, potentially meddling kids. Yeah, Coven of Immortal Guardians, there's some fun, different kind of supernatural entities that you can roll for to see which one you are, and they each have some stats and abilities associated, I think. The point of magical energy must be protected. And you can drive them away by killing them or through less violent means. Yep. It's pretty nice. I really like the main image you have there. And the different supernatural creatures you can get and different events that can happen are interesting. There's a lot of stuff to roll for, like what kind of environment the magical area you're protecting is, what kind of people are meddling or interfering, and it's all about getting them away, and you have the options of doing that violently or peacefully. So, it's been a while since I looked, so that's, I think, about all I can say. Yeah, rat in a suit. But if any of that sounds interesting to you, it's definitely worth a look. Faded Seas, this is another big one. This is the free version of the game, so there's some content that is blocked off if you get this version, but it is sort of a card game based. It's a crunchy, maybe not super crunchy, but like definitely a lot of mechanics because it's card based, where you can build your deck based on the class you have. And there's a discard pile as well as sort of like a trashed pile of cards that don't go back into the deck until the encounter's over, if I remember right. So there's a lot of customization, a lot of different mechanics, cool art. It is card-based, so if you like that, it does it very well. Or at least the best that I've seen of a tabletop RPG. Yeah, deck building. And, it's just a cool thing to check out if any of those things that I've said interest you. I haven't had much of a chance to engage with the setting. But it's a nice, in-depth card-building game where your class dictates your starting cards, but that can be customized a little as time goes on. If you do look into it, the cards are separate from this, but they are still accessible for free. Let me see if I can find that, because that's important to note. Yeah, and so, you can find, like, the decks here. So don't write it off if you download it and then you don't find the decks in the book itself. Yeah, like I said, a lot of the later chapters are not included. Like, you can see them, sort of, but they'll be marked not there on the table of contents. But there's plenty of content, more than enough to start playing, just from what they give you for this version. Okay, and then finally, this is my game, and it is the other sort of quote-unquote dexterity-based game. This one, I don't have the excuse of not being able to explain it well, since I haven't looked at it in a while, because, I made it, but I am losing energy a bit, so hopefully I'll still be able to do it justice. I'll try not to go too in-depth, though, because I don't want to show any favoritism here, but the first page can act as on a rule set all on its own, but further pages have more in-depth explanation and more roleplay options, and the back cover, ow, my throat hurts a bit, the back cover functions as its own 24-word version of the game. Opposing gunslingers count down roll, dice land before a line, roll past another, one stops the other's shot, too soon ref shoot. So, I think that's a fun little thing I did. It does not make a lot of sense, unless you really know how the game works already, unfortunately, but it also kind of works as a summary or an eye catch. Basically, 2 players, let's say you have 3 players, 2 of those players have created their own character gunslingers. They meet each other in a location. They roleplay getting into a conflict, and there's a little table to help you create characters that are likely to get into duels. I probably had a screenshot of that. If I didn't, I should. Well, I didn't. I'll add one of those later. But there's a table to help with character creations. You can get into a fight with the other gunslinger, and then a third player, supposing there are 3, acts as the ref, and sort of oversees things when the characters challenge each other to a duel. Then either you draw 2 lines on a paper, or just set up 2 objects, and the 2 players roll a d12 past the lines. If they, don't go past both lines, if they start too far or end too fast, in other words, they miss, but otherwise, the person whose die stops first shoots first. If they get a higher roll, they kill the other player outright. If they get a lower roll, they only wound, and the other player got hit, so they can only wound in response. So if neither player dies, you replete the duel then, and wounded players die if they're wounded again, or if they're killed outright. Basically, you roll dice, whoever stops first, shoot first, luck's involved because, skill's involved because you have to sort of roll right, not missing the lines, and you want to roll quickly, but not weakly, because you want your die to stop first, but not miss a line. And it's luck-based as well, because, even if you roll faster, your die might roll longer anyway, because that's just how dice works, and also the number that's rolled mattered, so it's a dice game that combines drama, luck, and skill. When one of the gunslinger dies, the one that killed them gets glory for it, and then the other players vote on what kind of gunslinger they were. And there's glory that gets added around based on those votes and stuff. I don't want to spend too much time just describing my own game. And the person that gets the most glory in the end becomes the biggest legend of the West and gets to tell the story of how all the duels went overall and what really happened, quote unquote. So yeah, I've sort of gone over everything. They're organized in order of popularity. I have not promoted my game at all because I've been busy with this, so it's the lowest. Might be the lowest even if I had, but Fated Seas, I think the main version of Fated Seas is primarily its own website. I didn't even realize it was on itch, so that's probably part of why it's a bit on the lower end. It's just automatically arranged in order of popularity as soon as you go to the page. I don't know if there's any way for me to change that, but like I said, I think all of these are worth checking out. I can't really say that for my game necessarily because I'm biased, but, I think it's an interesting setup at the very least. These are all good. Some are short, some are long, some have interesting dice rolling mechanics, some don't have dice at all, I think. I would assume I got at least one of those, but let me see if I actually know one, or if, Paraploidia, no dice, you're just doing real-world actions. Some of them, like Paraploidia, are not even, per se, RPGs as you would traditionally conceive them. They're like almost like ARGs that you create yourself as you go about your day. Some are just about lore and tools to set up a module without necessarily being their own system. Some are bookmarks, some are 24 words, some are 100-page PDFs. There's a lot of variety here, and I think everything is interesting and good and worth checking out. I'm sure I've gotten very repetitive by this point, but hopefully that gives you a bit more of an idea of what the games are like here, and thanks for sticking around.